Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Before I introduce Professor Cross, allow me to say that Bruce McFarlane is hopefully soon a distinguished visiting professor here at UJ, and we must thank Michael for that. So hopefully soon also we will have a lecture from Professor Bruce McFarlane. So ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Michael Cross. He is indeed a seasoned academic, and if I were to have read his whole CV, we would have been here for the rest of the evening. So I decided to highlight those particular issues that I think are his strengths. Professor Michael Cross began his academic career as a lecturer at the Faculty of Education, University of the Witwatersrand in 1986. He has been awarded teaching and research fellowships in several reputable institutions, including Johns Hopkins University and Northwestern University. He was a visiting scholar at Stanford University, Stockholm University, and Jules Verne University in Amiens. Prof Cross is author and co-author of several books, book chapters, and numerous articles in leading scholarly journals. He has served as an educational specialist in several major national education policy initiatives in South Africa, such as the National Commission on Higher Education and the Technical Committee on Norms and Standards for Education. He has also served as member of education evaluation teams in Africa, Europe, and the USA. However, his main passion lies in mentoring young education researchers. And he was the winner of the 1911-12 award as Outstanding Mentor of Educational Researchers in Africa from the Association for Educational Development in Africa. This is really a wonderful achievement. Even though his focus tonight will be on education, basic education and teachers, Professor Cross is a research-focused professor in higher education at the University of Johannesburg, and I would urge you to watch the space. Much is to come in higher education in this faculty very soon, in the field of higher education. As I said, mentoring young scholars is Professor Michael Cross' passion. For him, mentoring young researchers is not just a matter of supervising research effectively, but also a function of his academic identity and personality. And let me give you some examples. He says, a major challenge facing South African higher education as part of the apartheid legacy has been the underrepresentation of female and black scholars in the mainstream educational research and scholarly publications in South Africa. And Professor Michael Cross responded to this challenge. In response to this challenge, he drew on his experience as a member of the editorial board of Perspectives in Education, a leading South African scholarly journal, to establish the Authorship Development Project in 1994 in order to enable young scholars from disadvantaged backgrounds pursuing academic or research careers to assert themselves successfully as researchers and authors. Much work was done under this project and many publications. Besides the impact of this work, his activities in mentoring scholars can be assessed by several publications produced by the participants, the participation in editorial board, and Prof Cross was also instrumental in supporting authorships by disadvantaged scholars and in publishing support material. An example is Getting Published and Getting Read in South Africa, a handbook for writers of scholarly articles. Another one, No Easy Road, Transforming Higher Education in South Africa. And then also a workbook for professional and scholarly writing. Another important mentoring strategy used by Professor Cross is co-authorship with his students and young scholars. Another important dimension of Professor Cross's expertise lies in his ability to draw on the important national and international networks that he has been part of. For example, the SADC, Educational Policy Support Initiative, PSI, the African Higher Education Access to a Collaborative, the Liberal Arts in a Comparative Perspective Network, and there are many others. And this brings his expertise to these networks to enrich his supervision and mentoring work. Another example, he was successful in establishing the South African Doctoral Consortium in 2001 to run collaborative PhD programs in educational policy studies. And this was done in partnership with Stanford University and the University of Queensland in Australia. This consortium brought together faculty and students from 5 South African schools of education and worked with 2 successive cohorts of 25 students using innovative research training strategies which combined individual and team supervision and systematic mentoring to socialize students into mainstream research communities. This project has changed our practice of doctoral education. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Professor Michael Cross, and we look forward to hearing.
Thank you, Dean. Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Marala, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Anjana Parekh, colleagues and guests. This is for me not necessarily the point of entry, but an opportunity for me to renew my vows. I guess they were asking me, Michael, what's wrong with you? You said you're a professor, so what's happening now? And I said, well, if the marriage is not working well, you may have to renew your vows. So you, Jay, give me this chance to come here and renew my vows. That's why I'm here and talking to you. So I want to take this opportunity to share with you, with the audience, the flavor of some of my academic work that I've been doing or was doing for the last 27 years when I was at the University of Witwatersrand. I must stress here that although I'm dealing with teachers, I'm not necessarily talking about teachers in schools as they operate in schools. I'm focusing on how we're preparing teachers at the university level. That's my focus. So the topic, teacher professional identity as an act of transformation, was inspired by some of my students in the classroom. And I've told this story to some of my colleagues several times. In one of my class, my master's class at WITS, it was in 2011, I asked some of my students when they were introducing themselves, what do you do for a living? I asked one of the students. And one of the students said, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching for 25 years. Although I have tried different jobs in the past, teaching has always been my primary choice. Then I asked a much younger student, what do you do for a living? Initially, she said, I don't know. That was a bit puzzling for me, so I actually insisted. But what were you doing before you came here to WITS? Then she said, I work as a teacher. And I was impressed by the choice of words. I work as a teacher. I said, what do you mean? She said, I completed my teaching diploma years ago after my bachelor's degree. Since then, I've been teaching in a school while I'm looking for a different job. Michael, I don't like it. Now, that was revealing to me, and it actually raised a fundamental question to me. So it made me think about what perhaps very often we don't ask ourselves, which is, what makes teachers not only to develop the art of teaching, but also to embrace the professional identity attached to it. How do students become teachers and remain teachers? That's the question I was asking myself. So I brought together a team of my students, and one of them is here, Elizabeth. I think you played a role in that process. Thank you for that. We had about 200 teachers at WITS coming from Limpopo. And I'm saying here 200 teachers the way we define teachers ourselves, not the way I'll be dealing with teachers in this particular address. So there were 200 teachers because they had completed their courses at the college level, at the university level, and they were teaching in different schools in Limpopo. So they decided to come back to WITS to do the bachelor's degree for the second time, which was another puzzling factor in the process. We decided to select 45 at random teachers and interview those teachers using life history approach, narrative approach. That's how it all started, looking at their experiences, the images they use, the metaphors they're using about how they talk about their own experiences in schools, the challenges they face in schools, taking them through right from the childhood to the school experience to the time they decide to come to WITS, in order to make sense about the reason why they had that particular commitment that brought them back to WITS in order to redo their degree. Now, all this is happening in a very specific contextual complexity. It's happening in a situation where teaching and nursing, if we look at the history and to go back, were highly racialized professions. But they were the only professions that provided black teachers or black people to some sort of blue collar professions. And at the same time, within the rural environment where these teachers are coming from, teaching was a highly gendered profession. And even today it happens. Lots of teachers, when it comes to boys, okay, go to school. But when it comes to girls, get married and have some children. That's what happens to the teachers, to girls. Now, the first question that I had to address in this particular case is, first of all, how government has been dealing with this particular issue. What sort of a strategy is being put in place to address this particular issue of professional identity of the teachers? Now, the kinds of motives, of reason that were driving teachers into the profession today are vanishing. The kinds of attractors that brought teachers to teaching are vanishing. There's also a structural problem, and it's the fact that when it comes to the academic issues concerning teachers, academic issues are dealt with by the South African Qualifications Authority. Occupational issues concerning teachers are addressed by provincial departments, which are the main employees. And professional issues, the issues which are much more connected to teacher professional identity, are addressed by the South African Council for Educators, SACE. Now, there is some sort of in other words, the synergies across those different departments are not really very effective. On the other hand, we are operating within an environment which is highly unionized. And very often, the activity of the unions whether it is justifiable or is just driven by other reasons, it tends actually to change the commitment that teachers had about these particular professions. Now, how does government address that? The National Planning Commission proposed an approach rooted on performativity, accountability, strong leadership, and rewards. Its strategy rests on four key pillars. Make teachers accountable, make teachers competent, which is preparing well the teachers, get rid of union dominance in schools, provide incentives to the teaching profession. There was a whole debate about whether incentives really will change the attitude and the commitment of the teachers to the teaching profession. The department has adopted a much more transformative approach to this issue. So the department is going for trying to embrace the unions, so giving more support to professional bodies, giving unions a funded role in teacher development to make sure that they also become responsible for teacher development of their own members. The question that arises is whether such pulse technologies will have any significant impact in promoting teacher professional identity. Stephen Ball was here about 3 or 4 years ago, made a comment which is very interesting in response to this particular strategy adopted by the National Planning Commission and by the department. He said that there is a danger, and the danger is a shift in emphasis in the concerns of teachers from ethics to efficiency. A reconstruction of teachers as technicians. The production of feelings of uncertainty, instability, and ontological insecurity. There's definitely a danger about it, but doesn't mean that it's not a useful package. That's not what I'm contesting here. So, for me, the issue is not necessarily about policy. Let me just take pause a little bit. And my discussant, Professor Chisholm, when she read my notes, she raised a question. Michael, you're not talking about policy. That's very interesting. And not long ago, days ago, we had a seminar. We have a series of seminars on theory and method. And the speaker was focusing on teachers. And the whole debate was around the role of knowledge, professional knowledge, in inculcating professional identity. So I'm left with this puzzle. Is it policy which does not enable or should enable teachers to develop a professional identity? Is it knowledge, whether content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, contextual knowledge? The arguments being put forward was, yes, even if they have those forms of knowledge, they are unable to recontextualize those forms of knowledge once they find themselves in schools. Another argument is, okay, even if they're able to recontextualize those forms of knowledge in schools, they may be unable to recontextualize themselves in order to be effective in operating in schools. Yeah, I accept that this stream around knowledge and the stream around policy do play a role in terms of enhancing professional commitment, in terms of developing professional identity amongst teachers. But what I've realized here is that we may be missing one particular point, is who are these people we're talking about? They have interests, they have desire, they make choices, they're coming from a diverse cultural environment, which raise an issue. Unless we take into account the identity of these people, then we may even fail with just focusing on one of these particular dimensions. So I'm not actually ignoring policy. It's just the interface of policy and professional identity, and the interface of knowledge and professional identity, which I'm concerned with. The question of identity has occupied sociological and anthropological research for several years. There are so many writings about this. Stanley Aronowitz, Etienne Balbar, Hom Baba, Ernesto Laclau, Cornel West, Rajman. There's so many. But one point where I distance myself with some of these writings is the tendency to naturalize identity, making it a matter of biology or history or culture. We very often say, they've been trained to be teachers, therefore they are teachers. I think that's the assumption that we operate with all the time. They come to UJ or to WITS, they go through this training, and after they've completed the diploma or the degree, they are teachers. And what I'm arguing here about is, yes, they are ready to do the job, but are they committed to the teaching profession? Have they developed their professional identity as teachers? That's the question I'm grappling with in this particular talk. So I would rather historicize identity and center our discussion on the analysis of its production as a dynamic process. People go through different processes and experiences. And as they go through those experiences, they negotiate meaning. They define who they are, and they listen to what people say about themselves. And on the basis of that, they make choices, and they shape their identity. The puzzle for me was, how do I develop a conceptual framework on the basis of which I'll be able to understand this complex process, this dynamic process through which teachers develop their professional identity? I decided to draw on different theories, but mainly on Wenger, the theory of social learning, the notion of community of practice. But linked to that, there's also Thiene's notion of communities of difference. Because that's the way they organize themselves. Of course, they converge, ultimately. They converge in the community of practice, but the drivers of that process could be different, and they organize themselves, and they create those kinds of networks and associations around that. So, the last point related to that is the role of formal training that we put in place, the programs that we run. What's the role of that in enhancing professional identity? That's another dimension I had to look at. And lastly was the workplace and the range of networks that teachers create or participate in. But overall, an important controversy running through these debates separates those who place emphasis on the role of lived experience, pre-teaching, fictive, and lived experience, from those who elevate the role of professional development, of teacher development. So I think those are the key, that's the main point of contestation. Those who privilege the lived experience, whether at family level, at school level, at the university level, at workplace level, or in the networks that teachers participate in, and they affiliate with that. Or those who just privilege formal training, as very often we do. And how do we link those two? This is well actually articulated by Samara and Luz Kepler. They say that becoming a teacher involves more than transposing teaching skills into an already established personal identity. So there's the assumption that there's already an identity. Because they come to do teaching diploma or degree, they already have an identity as teachers. And all we have to do is to inculcate those skills and the knowledge they need, and perhaps a degree of values and attitudes. So it means perhaps that we're not paying attention to the identity teacher in these individuals. Where does it come from? To embrace the identity teacher in one's life, teachers must negotiate at least 4 identities. Those they bring to the university, those they develop while doing the coursework at the university, those they develop during teaching experience, and those they develop in their networks and the learning communities they may create and establish. So what I'm trying to do here is to try and bring together these 4 dimensions. Because in my understanding, that's the only way we can come to grips with the challenge, with the complexity of identity construction that these teachers go through. So I draw also on several constructs in order to bring those dimensions together. One of them is the concept of social learning that I mentioned before, community of practice, community of difference. Now, just to highlight these, what's the value of these constructs? Learning about things that are not us means being involved in a learning relation that informs one about himself or herself. What it means that we join a network. What we learn from the network, it could be necessarily about us, but that's through that learning experience that we discover ourselves and we make choices. And that's the value of participating in those learning networks. Second, they highlight the role of learning space in choice making and forms of identification. In other words, they become like a commonplace book that they read all the time. Through that commonplace book, teachers engage with each other, interpret themselves, interpret one another, interpret their sense of community. The knowledge of their practice deepens in the process. And their understanding of themselves and how they position themselves in relation to the teaching profession changes. And that's what happens. Wenger elaborates on this particular dimension and brings 3 important dimensions that he calls modes of identification, which is how learning networks operate. One is engagement with others, how they relate to each other. Another one is imagination, when we intellectually reach beyond the world of our own networks and we think about other networks. And alignment, and I'll come back to that later. And alignment really is about some of the theories developed around social capital, bonding, linking, bonding with the people who are like us, linking with the people who are different from us, and bridging with people in powerful positions. That happens also in those networks. And that's how learning takes place in those networks. So, another important set a concept that we brought in order to understand that particular experience of teachers as they go through the process is the notion of pre-teaching image. And I want to stress here that we're using the notion of image here in Spivak's sense, which is struggle in and by words. So image is not as a neutral activity, but as action. The way we act upon ourselves and act upon other people. And we change the relationship between us, between ourselves. So that's in that sense that I'm using images. But very often we create images and we don't take into account that particular dimension that images are action, in fact. When they say, Michael is this lazy professor. Students, every time will look at me, the image will come. It may just contaminate that particular relationship that I used to have with my students. So it is in this sense I'm saying images are not neutral. They're action. They change social relations. But the images I'm interested in here are pre-teaching images. The image that people have as they imagine what would be if I was a teacher. Fictive images. Those are the images they develop as they're doing the course. As they're doing the coursework, they're processing their fictive images. They're pre-teaching images. And they're coming closer to what they conceptualize as their role in teaching. And lived images. Lived images is when they teach. When they go to the teaching practice and they're actually in action and they're teaching there. Let's start with the pre-teaching experience, what I will call here the imagined self. The imagined self. In his account on the 7 habits of highly effective people, Covey makes the point that the path to success is to begin with the end in mind, to start with a clear understanding of your destination, and to know where you're going so that you better understand where you are now, so that the steps you take are always in the right direction. I'll say it's an interesting insight, but it only applies to people who have some sort of aligned ambition. What I mean by aligned ambition here is people are capable of setting goals, and they're capable of devising strategies to achieve those goals. That's not the case with most of our student teachers. That's not the case. So it's very difficult if we do not facilitate that particular process. So what happens then in a pre-teaching experience? Pre-teaching experience refers to the experiences through which they begin to imagine their role in the teaching profession and to develop awareness and an idea of teaching as a job, as a profession. It is during this stage that individuals develop a conception of self-identity, the imagined self, in relation to teaching, or the pre-teaching images of themselves as teachers, which they bring to the formal training. Now, why are these images important? Why are they so critical in the process? Important observation. I consider images, I've mentioned already. This means that images are not neutral intellectual activity. They are action and practice with profound implications for the affirmation of desire, interests, and career paths. So I'm saying these images are behind the kinds of choice that these student teachers make before they come to the university. Now, when we looked at what our teachers from Limpopo were saying, they were actually outlining a range of things around that. To get a good job, to face new challenges, to provide service to society, to make worthwhile contribution to my community, to make a difference to the lives of young people, to give something back to society. And they went on and on and on. It's really sometimes confusing, contradictory actually in some cases. But it's something real profound. When we decide to go back and really pursue some of these ideas where they come from, then looking back at the family first, and then move to the experience at schools. Then the question for us was, what's the role of the family in shaping these kinds of choices they're making? Given the historical prevalence of the teaching profession alongside nursing, police service as blue-collar jobs for blacks, the role of family members is critical as role models and sometimes as sources of inspiration. So it's a dimension we cannot actually underestimate. Now, borrowing from Wenger, I argue that it is the constant vertical alignment across generations, from generation to generation, and the horizontal alignment across the family of actions, choices, and practices that enable these teachers to frame positive pre-teaching images that inspire them to make those kinds of choices. So if you have a teacher, you have a series of teachers in a particular family, the likelihood is that some of those, some of the children in that particular family may make choices related to that. But family pressure can be driven by market or utilitarian reasons to get a better job, for example. Social justice reasons to plow back to the community. But overall, the family represents a critical space where the ideas about teaching obtained from experiences in schools and the community or village are confronted and negotiated. So that particular dimension, very often is that I'm talking here about how we prepare teachers. And the challenge is, what's the place of these particular experiences within the family in our programs? How do we deal with that? Are we going to integrate that? How do we deal with that? So anyway, a family is a site where career choice is legitimized. It is a site linked, especially in rural settings. It's a site linked to strong moral obligations. One thing that we very often ignore is the fact that within a rural environment, this idea of Ubuntu is very strong. And there's always that commitment of plowing back. I'm going to do this particular course because I want to give back to my own community. School. At school, students are exposed to a variety of teachers with a diverse of teaching styles with whom they forge different relationships. Some are good, entertaining, and inspiring. More notable in this regard is the image of teachers as agents of social change. Others are bad, alienating. And if you look at the words they're using, boring, rude, incompetent, images linked to horrifying stories. The idea of teaching as a career choice is very often triggered by the possibility of practicing some teaching alongside their teachers. These experiences give them the opportunity to confront what it takes to be a teacher in terms of personal ability, responsibility, and suitability. They shape their pre-teaching images, how they imagine themselves as teachers, positive or negative, and very often expressed through analogies and metaphors. These images are instrumental in the choice that individuals make regarding the teaching profession. So overall, there's some theoretical insights emanating from these particular sites. One is the role of positive images they develop in those either at the family level or at school level. And they're very important in terms of the choice they're making and the commitment to those choices. it happens very often that it's actually stronger when these students have a chance of experimenting what they're doing. It could be at school, the teacher may ask some of the learners to help the teacher in helping other students. But it happens also at the family level that the wife may ask the husband to help in assessing a particular test, preparing a particular lesson. And that just creates that sense that, oh, I can actually do it. I think that I can become a teacher. And it frames those pre-teaching images. Now, getting to know how to do the job. Students come to the university. And I just want to make a couple of points about that. At the university, there are actual 4 dimensions in terms of what we do. One is what I was talking about as transposition of skills and knowledge to these students, whether content knowledge, whether pedagogical knowledge, whether contextual knowledge. Another is induction in some sort of reflexive practice in some case, and values also that should shape their behavior. But the question for me is, how is this related to professional identity? The work of Bernstein shows beyond doubt how orderings of knowledge, he calls it knowledge structures, and forms of pedagogic transmission influence identity and identity change for both practitioners and learners. So there is, to some extent, a relationship between knowledge and professional identity. He goes further and he argues that professional commitment has also its origins in the structuring of effects of professional knowledge. So professional expertise, which also has some bearing on professional identity. But I would like to suggest that developing professional identity as we prepare teachers cannot be just confined to those 2 dimensions. It also requires a strong normative grammar. Given the deeply entrenched apartheid legacy, such a grammar should transcend the narrow considerations of performativity, profit-driven. It should embrace strong ethical responsibility. It has to enable them to confront their pre-teaching images and fictive images, to position themselves in the teaching profession. The question then I would ask is, does the content, the package that we offer in preparing teachers, enable teachers to renegotiate this baggage they have, these images they have, fictive images, pre-teaching images, in order to position themselves in the teaching profession? That's the question I'm asking. And that's why I'm saying that perhaps what seems to be lacking is this particular strong grammar that we have to integrate. Don't ask me how. Don't ask me how. Things got worse with OBE. And when it comes to OBE, the legacy of OBE had the effect of gradually decentering modernist conceptions that associate teaching and learning in schools with formal transmission of structured content knowledge through preconceived and prescribed methodologies or pedagogies. It favored postmodernist forms of knowledge generated through constructivist and experiential, informal, and reflexive epistemologies. As a result, teacher programs have become a field of contestation. A field of contestation, and I would like to suggest here, between 3 competing discourses. One discourse about what to teach, reflecting a battle over the structures and forms of content knowledge required under the new curriculum and the relevant forms of integration, which warrants a re-examination of the role of teachers and the nature of their professional knowledge. The discourse of how to teach manifests in the battle over the role of pedagogy in the classroom. More specifically, the role of teachers as facilitators vis-a-vis the role of teachers as educators. Here is really a major challenge that we have. How do we actually enable them to become not facilitators but educators? And the norms and standards actually came with a very interesting proposal. One was around the issue of licensing and relicensing of teachers, which never worked. But I think there's a powerful dimension related to that. But another one is the pastoral discourse. It's amazing that teachers coming from colleges, those who are trained in the colleges, they're always criticizing the programs that we're offering for neglecting that particular dimension. Because they're saying, we do not know how to deal with these kids. Can you help us? That's one of the questions that they actually ask. The workplace. Central for understanding the role of the workplace in the construction of the professional self are the concepts of situated cognition and negotiated meaning. Broadly, situated cognition suggests that identity takes shape and grows in complexity as an individual engages with new experiences, situations, and activities. Under such condition, negotiation of meaning around new experiences becomes part of the way they negotiate their professional self, their professional identity. To note that teachers enter the workplace in a very vulnerable position. And they're entering that process in a stage where they're still constructing and reconstructing their sense of professional self. And they face a diverse of challenges in school. But what's really critical at school level of importance to my argument is the fact that the teacher constructs regarding the workplace drew my attention to the role of healthy social interaction between managers, teachers, and learners. So those relationships become actual spaces through which teachers negotiate meaning and they make choices. And it's a dimension that very often we also neglect. Of course, contextual knowledge was supposed to actually deal with those kinds of issues. And finally, the role of learning space. I was talking networks. Learning communities have been an object of interest among those who approach teacher identity formation from the foundations of situated cognition, social learning, and identity. In this regard, participants' constructs place value in. They see those as the place where they have mutual support from colleagues, they share ideas, linking with other teachers, bonding with other teachers, bridging, and also have teamwork. So I thus argue that as locus of engagement in action and interpersonal relations, resource networks for bonding, linking and bridging the knowledge gaps, and common space for shared knowledge and negotiation of meaning, learning communities hold the key to real transformation of teachers. So I think these are the sites that offer an opportunity for change, for transformation I'm talking about as in the development of professional identity. Now I'd like to stop here and then just go and look at my main argument, summarize my main argument in this process. So basically, I'm arguing in this lecture that professional identification of teachers is not just an outcome of knowledge, of skills that we inculcate in those teachers through our programs. It is actually part of a complex process through which teachers negotiate meaning. That's the key to my argument. And I'm arguing that in that process, critical is the role of lived experience they go through before they come to the university, when they are on campus, and when they leave campus. I'm arguing that to facilitate that process, formal and informal networks that may happen when they are on campus or when they go to the workplace, they are also critical in facilitating the process through which they negotiate their identity. So it is through those lived experiences at all those levels that self-change takes place. And it's on that base that I'm arguing that professional identity is an act of transformation, of change, of individual change. Through negotiating meaning, through competence, of course. That's why professional expertise is real critical in the process. Through affiliation to networks and membership of those networks. And through participation in the profession. Unfortunately, the South African Council of Educators is not really very, very active in this process. In other words, I'm saying that it is through appropriation and ownership of meaning relate to these experiences that teachers develop their teaching identity. Now, what does it mean then for us? I'm suggesting that there is a need for a paradigm shift in the way we deal with our teacher training programs. I'm arguing that in the process, we need to pay attention in terms of our research to inform our programs. Research into the sites, moments, strategies, and the process through which teaching consciousness is shaped. So I'm not saying here that policy does not play a role. I'm not saying that knowledge does not play a role. I'm saying that we have to have an integrated approach that brings these different dimensions and takes seriously their lived experience. Now, the question is, how do we go about doing that? I'm saying we need to redirect our research, and I'm talking especially for those who are involved in teaching, research into teaching and the design of programs for preparing teachers should take those dimensions into account. Thank you.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.